In October 1973, a 23-year-old man left his dormitory and was never seen again. For nearly 5 decades, the case remained a haunting mystery until a chance discovery brought a breakthrough. Douglas Hollowell Brick was born on October 12, 1950 to Harold and Donna Hollowell Brick. He spent his early years in Pocatello, Idaho. As a student at Pocatello High School, Douglas graduated in 1968 as a top scholar. He actively participated in multiple school organizations, including the Boys Council, Key Club, and German Club. He also served as a delegate to Boys State, showcasing his leadership potential. With clear ambitions for his future, he enrolled at the University of Utah in Salt Lake City to continue his education. On his 23rd birthday on October 12, 1973, Douglas was last seen leaving Austin Hall, his dorm on campus. His car was later found parked nearby, and inside were his belongings, packed with care, implying that he may have been preparing to go somewhere. Near the vehicle, the investigators found his wallet discarded on the ground. These clues immediately raised concerns, especially after further investigation revealed troubling details about Douglas' recent behavior. Prior to his disappearance, Douglas had taken several unusual steps. He had withdrawn from many of his university classes and closed his bank accounts. Even more concerning, records showed that he had purchased a gun and 500 rounds of .22 ammunition. When his dorm room was searched, it was discovered that one box of the ammunition was missing. These findings prompted an extensive search effort by the University of Utah Police and Salt Lake County Search and Rescue. They focused on the foothills behind the university campus. Despite their efforts, no trace of Douglas was ever found. After the initial investigation, a friend came forward claiming to have seen Douglas driving a truck on the route between Ogden, Utah, and Pocatello, Idaho. According to the friend, Douglas said that he had left college and was planning to begin a new life. He reportedly asked that his family not be told of his whereabouts. However, this sighting became the last known contact. For decades, Douglas's disappearance remained unsolved. Lost police records, fruitless search efforts, and varying accounts of his last movements kept the case shrouded in uncertainty. After almost 5 decades, in 2022, the University of Utah Police Department brought in a crime data analyst named Nicole Mitchell. While working with Utah's statewide Information and Analysis Center, Mitchell uncovered a forgotten cold case, Douglas Brick's disappearance. At the time, Major Heather Stursnegger was serving as the investigation's lieutenant. Upon learning about the overlooked case, she agreed without hesitation to reopen it. Detective John Dial was assigned to the investigation after Stursnegger received a promotion, but he quickly realized the case file offered very little to begin with. As they began piecing together what they could, one lead came from a journal entry written by Douglas's mother, Donna. In the entry, she recalled a meeting with a psychic shortly after her son's disappearance. The psychic allegedly described specific details, including the claim that Douglas had gone to the foothills above the university campus. Though unconventional, this clue aligned with the location that had been extensively searched back in 1973. The first real breakthrough came when investigators found a record of a 2018 phone call from Douglas's sister to University Dispatch, inquiring about her brother's case. That call became the starting point for a more targeted effort. Using the information from that call, Detective Dill traveled to California to meet with Douglas' sister. During the visit, she provided a DNA sample via cheek swab, hoping it would help identify her brother if he had ever been listed as a John Doe in the national system. The sample was submitted for comparison, but the results yielded no matches. Despite the setback, Douglas' sister also provided Dill with contact details for his girlfriend at the time of his disappearance. The woman was living out of state and offered helpful background about Douglas, although nothing concrete emerged to suggest a new direction for the search. Months passed without a breakthrough, and the case remained unsolved until October 2024. That month, a group of hunters stumbled upon human remains, specifically skull fragments, in the foothills near the University of Utah. The discovery was immediately flagged, and DNA testing was ordered. In May 2025, the results came back with a match to the DNA sample provided by Douglas' sister. At last, The decades-long mystery of what happened to Douglas had a definitive answer. The remains were his. Following the DNA confirmation, the University of Utah police formally closed the case even though it could not be confirmed how he lost his life. On May 3, 2025, Douglas' family was notified of the results. The family said in a statement, "We never stopped hoping for answers about Doug's disappearance. We are relieved to finally have some answers. After 52 years, this result, while sad, is nothing short of a miracle." In June 1997, a man and his daughter stumbled upon a dismembered torso in a plastic container at Hempstead Lake State Park in New York. Years later, in 2011, the skeletal remains of a child were found near Jones Beach, eventually linked to the same unidentified woman through DNA. But they would only be identified more than a decade later. On June 28, 1997, a chilling discovery was made in Hempstead Lake State Park located in Lakeview, New York. While walking through the wooded area, a man and his daughter came across a Rubbermaid container. Inside, it was a woman's dismembered torso, along with a floral pillowcase and a red towel. The victim's head, arms, and lower legs had been removed and were never recovered. The container was found approximately 200 yards north of Peninsula Boulevard, near McDonald Pond, on the west side of Lake Drive. With no immediate clues to the victim's identity, the investigation initially stalled. One of the only identifiable features on the body was a tattoo located on the woman's left breast. Hoping to generate leads, the investigators shared an image of the tattoo in a national tattoo magazine. Their efforts paid off when Steve Cullen, a tattoo artist from Connecticut, came forward. He recalled giving the tattoo to a young black woman, estimated to be around 18 or 19 years old, who had visited his shop with an aunt and cousin. During the appointment, she mentioned being from either the Bronx or Long Island, and said she was staying in Connecticut due to issues with a boyfriend. The investigators began referring to her as Peaches based on the tattoo design. In April 2011, 14 years later, more human remains were found near Jones Beach State Park. DNA testing conducted in December 2016 confirmed that the newly discovered remains belonged to the same individual known as Peaches. Additionally, the remains of a young child were located nearby. Forensic testing revealed that the child, identified only as Baby Doe, was the biological daughter of Peaches. This development confirmed the victims were mother and daughter, though their true names were still unknown at that time. Although this significant breakthrough provided clarity about the victims' relationship, the case remained unresolved. After another 4 years went by, in 2020, the investigators intensified their efforts to identify the unknown woman and child by turning to advanced forensic methods. Nassau County authorities and the FBI partnered with Othram. Through their analysis, the Othram scientists determined that the woman known for years only as Peaches was Tanya Denise Jackson, originally from Alabama and born on October 22, 1970. Using the same genetic techniques, researchers were also able to identify the young child found near Jones Beach State Park. She was confirmed to be Tatiana Marie Dykes. After decades without answers, Nassau County Police formally revealed their identities to the public on April 23, 2025. The authorities explained that the delay in the announcement was necessary to properly notify relatives and to make burial arrangements. Tanya served in the United States Army between July 1993 and February 1995, during which time she was stationed in Texas, Georgia, and Missouri. After completing her military service, she moved to Brooklyn, New York, where she found work at a medical office, possibly as a medical assistant. Tatiana was born on March 17, 1995 in Texas. At the time of their demises, Tanya was no longer in contact with her family, and neither she nor her daughter had ever been officially reported missing. Tanya and Tatiana were eventually laid to rest in their home state of Alabama, receiving full military honors and recognition of Tanya's service in the U.S. Army. The discovery of their remains in locations not far from the sites connected to the Gilgo Beach serial crimes raised questions about a possible link. That case involves a series of unsolved crimes, mostly of female prostitutes, found along Long Island's South Shore. Although Tanya and Tatiana were found in areas close to those crime scenes, law enforcement has not confirmed any connection between their demises and the Gilgo Beach investigation. In 2023, Rex Hoyerman was arrested and charged in several of the Gilgo Beach cases, but he has not been implicated in ending the lives of Tanya and her daughter. Despite identifying the victims, the case remains unsolved. The investigation is ongoing, with detectives still working to uncover what happened and who was responsible. The authorities continue to appeal to the public for any information that could help bring the case to a close. A reward of $25,000 is being offered for details that lead to an arrest and conviction. Law enforcement is particularly interested in speaking with anyone who may have interacted with Tanya during her time in Brooklyn. In 1991, the body of a 27-year-old woman was found stabbed multiple times by the roadside in St. Cloud, Florida. Thanks to advances in DNA technology, the perpetrator was discovered and arrested. Julia Sue Wilbanks was born in 1964 and originally came from Elaine, Arkansas. She grew up in a financially stable environment, but her life took a turn when she relocated to Osceola County, Florida. In Florida, Julia became entangled in prostitution and struggled with illegal substance addiction. Julia was last seen in the McLaren Circle area of Kissimmee, Florida. She was reportedly walking through the neighborhood, though it remains unclear where she was headed. That brief sighting would be the last time anyone saw her alive. On September 23, 1991, her lifeless body was discovered off Neptune Road, roughly half a mile west of what is now Old Canoe Creek Road in St. Cloud. The discovery was made by a group of motorists who noticed her remains and flagged down a passing police officer. Julia had been deceased for over 24 hours by the time the authorities arrived. The crime was brutal. She had been stabbed approximately 17 times, with fatal wounds inflicted to her heart. The investigators immediately launched an inquiry into her case, collecting physical evidence and attempting to piece together her final movements. However, the investigation faced immediate hurdles. Although a possible suspect's blood was found on the shorts Julia was wearing, the technology at the time limited the scope of DNA comparisons. Throughout the 1990s, the evidence was tested multiple times against various individuals, but no match was ever made as the case eventually fell into the category of unsolved cases. In 2012, after 2 decades, the investigators took a renewed step in Julia's cold case by submitting the unknown DNA profile to a company that specialized in genetic genealogy. For years, this method produced no solid leads, but the case remained active in the background, waiting for science to catch up to the evidence. By early 2025, the genetic genealogy search finally produced a breakthrough, identifying a primary suspect, Gene Stuller. The investigators learned that Stuller had lived near Julia's last known address back in 1991, placing him in close proximity. All that remained was to confirm whether his DNA matched the profile found on the victim. The detectives then began a period of surveillance, watching for an opportunity to collect his DNA without direct confrontation. In March 2025, the authorities obtained a crucial piece of evidence: a straw discarded by Stuller that contained his DNA. Testing confirmed a match. On April 21st, Stuller was arrested at his home in Apopka, Florida, where neighbors said he had lived for about 2 decades. He was charged in the second-degree slaying and with disturbing a deceased body. Despite the shocking nature of the charges, many residents in the area were stunned, having known Stuller as a friendly and outgoing man. One neighbor described Stuller as a nice fella and expressed disbelief that someone they had lived beside for years could be accused of such a crime. Stuller remains in custody as the investigation moves forward. The St. Cloud Police Department emphasized that justice delayed does not have to mean justice denied, especially as new tools allow them to revisit evidence with fresh precision. One night in September 1989, an 18-year-old woman left her job at a West Springfield, Missouri club and vanished into the dark. For decades, her case remained unsolved, stalled by the limitations of forensic technology. But a new round of DNA testing shattered the silence. Jennifer Williams, born in 1971, was an 18-year-old woman working as a topless dancer. She was married to Jeff Williams, and the couple had exchanged vows at a courthouse chapel in Tulsa on October 24, 1987. Their relationship was described as close and loving, and despite her line of work, Jeff often spoke of Jennifer as a hard-working woman and a good person. On the night of September 7, 1989, around 10 p.m., Jennifer left her job at the Body Shop, a club located in West Springfield, Missouri, now known as Centerfold. She was expected to return home or at least stop by her husband's workplace, but she never arrived at either location. Her sudden disappearance sparked concern, and a search effort was quickly initiated to locate her. Witnesses last reported seeing Jennifer walking in the direction of her husband's business, but after that point, there were no confirmed sightings. Days passed with no sign of her, and fear grew as the silence continued. On the 12th day following her disappearance, a group of teenagers made a horrifying discovery: Jennifer's body. She had been indecently assaulted and her life was ended, leaving behind her 1-year-old son. Her remains were found in Springfield, Missouri. The following day, Jeff was arrested. He was the prime suspect in his wife's case, but he also violated his probation on a charge of reckless handling of a firearm. Despite the urgency of the case, law enforcement faced serious limitations in their ability to gather definitive evidence. At the time, forensic technology, particularly DNA testing, was still in its infancy and not widely accessible for detailed analysis. As a result, the investigation faced significant hurdles. The case quickly went cold. For 3 decades, the case of Jennifer remained without resolution until 2019, when Jennifer's assault kit was finally tested using modern technology. However, the results at that time were inconclusive, offering no clear path forward. It was not until 2024 that another round of DNA testing would lead to a major development in the case. This time, the improved analysis techniques yielded results that pointed directly to a suspect. The authorities identified 62-year-old Paul Bowles as the individual connected to the crime against Jennifer Williams. At the time of his identification, he was being held at the Fulton State Hospital in Callaway County, Missouri on unrelated charges and was contacted by detectives. On April 17, 2025, Bowles was arrested and formally charged in connection with the brutal crime. He was booked into the Callaway County Jail, and the charges brought against him included second-degree slaying, forcible assault, and forcible sodomy. In a statement posted to Facebook following the announcement, Jennifer's husband, Jeff, wrote a message to his wife. In the early hours of February 9, 2005, a cab driver picked up 3 passengers in Brooklyn, New York. Hours later, his body was discovered. Nearly 2 decades later, a breakthrough came when advancements in DNA technology uncovered new evidence. Mor Hussain was born in 1970 in Pakistan. At 35 years old, he lived in Brooklyn, New York with his wife Asma and their 2 young sons, Huzaifa and Safwan. Mor had previously worked in construction but shifted to cab driving when jobs in his trade became scarce. Seeking to provide for his family, he took up an overnight shift with a local Brooklyn livery service, a position he had held for only 3 weeks. In the early hours of February 9, 2005, Mor accepted a fare from 3 men who requested transportation from Brooklyn to Enfield, Connecticut. Later that same morning, the officers from the Windsor Locks Police Department were dispatched to the intersection of South Main Street and School Street in Connecticut, where a deceased male was reported. The victim was identified as Mor Hussain. Initial findings confirmed that he had been shot and slain, prompting an immediate joint investigation by Windsor Locks detectives and the Connecticut State Police. An autopsy later revealed that Mor had sustained a fatal gunshot wound to the head. Just days after the discovery of his body on February 12th, his minivan was located abandoned, back in Brooklyn. The vehicle's location raised more questions about the sequence of events and whether his assailants had returned to the city after the incident. The investigators began working tirelessly to piece together the circumstances surrounding Murray's final hours. At the time of the investigation, the detectives identified 3 individuals as suspects. All were Pakistani nationals and reportedly high school friends from Brooklyn. Despite this significant lead, the authorities were unable to secure enough evidence to make arrests. Compounding the challenge, the suspects had already left the United States, severely hindering further investigative efforts. As a result, the case lost momentum and ultimately went cold. After nearly 2 decades in February 2024, nearly 2 decades after Mor's life was taken, detectives from the Windsor Locks Police Department reopened the case. This renewed effort was driven by advances in forensic science and a fresh review of the evidence collected in 2005. Critical progress came through the application of updated DNA technology, which enabled the analysis of trace biological material recovered from both Moriad's clothing and the interior of his minivan. One of the pivotal breakthroughs in the case came when DNA found inside his cab matched that of Muhammad Ali, a 38-year-old man residing in Dublin, Ohio. Ali had previously lived in Brooklyn, New York, with the support of multiple agencies, including the Hartford State's Attorney's Office, Connecticut State Police, personnel at the State Forensic Lab in Meriden, and the New York City Police Department. Windsor Locks detectives secured an arrest warrant for Ali. He was formally charged with conspiracy to commit slaying and accessory to slaying. On March 26, 2025 U.S., Marshals located Ali in Dublin and arrested him without incident. He was transported to the Franklin County Jail, awaiting extradition to Connecticut. The investigation did not end with Ali's arrest. The detectives identified additional suspects, continuing to build their case. DNA evidence also linked Arf and Butt to the crime, one of the 3 original suspects identified in 2005. However, his life had been ended in Brooklyn in 2020, preventing any further legal action against him. The 3rd suspect named in the arrest warrant was NYPD Detective Rohail Khalid. Khalid had submitted his DNA in 2024, which reportedly connected him to the scene. Although Khalid claimed he had been working at a bagel shop during the time of the crime, the authorities found no hard evidence to corroborate his alibi. Khalid's attorney stated that his client had fully cooperated with the investigators and had been cleared of wrongdoing. Nonetheless, according to the arrest warrant, Windsor Locks Police had originally named Ali, Khalid, and Butt as suspects back in 2005. The 3 men had been close friends who attended the same high school in Brooklyn. Windsor Locks Detective Sergeant Jeff Lamson said, "We believe the cab driver was in his van, was either compelled to pull over or pulled over under his own volition, was shot in the car and then pulled out, thrown over the guardrail, and his vehicle was located in Brooklyn." At a court appearance held in Hartford following Ali's arrest, members of Mor's family, including his widow and sons, were present. Among them was Huzaifa, who had been just 4 years old when his father's life was ended. Now an adult, he expressed his appreciation for the investigative efforts, stating, "Are grateful for the work of the PD and the efforts of everyone involved to bring our family some peace." 21-year-old Safwan Mord said, "He is trying to sort through mixed emotions of gratitude and grief." He said, "We had lost hope. We kind of stopped thinking about it. We just felt like this massive injustice happened and then there was no resolution. There was no justice." Mourid's wife began to worry as time passed and he did not arrive home, 3 days before his body was found. Safwan said, "She said that she woke up and he was not home. She was not that worried. She just assumed he was out working. But you know, time keeps passing and then eventually she starts getting worried. She started calling and he was not picking up. She was calling other people in the family. They did not know where he was either." Safwan also said, "I do not have any memories. My brother, the only memory he has was in the funeral home. His body was being taken back to Pakistan to be buried there, and someone held him up to see. That is the only thing he can recall." Safwan said the following of seeing Ali in court, "I never felt that angry. To tell you the truth, I did not want to see his face. I did. He looked pathetic. I really mean it. He looked disgusting." Muhammad Ali is currently being held on a $1 million bond. The prosecutors consider him a flight risk due to his earlier departure to Pakistan shortly after the crime, a move that had initially helped him evade justice for nearly 20 years. In February 1977, a young mother was found lifeless in the back seat of her own Volkswagen Beetle, parked at an unfamiliar apartment complex in San Jose, California. For 48 years, the case remained cold. Janette Rston lived a quiet life marked by hard work and dedication to her young son. In her early 20s, she relocated to the Bay Area, determined to create a more stable and promising future for her family. At just 24 years old, she was focused on rebuilding her life and providing for her child. Everything changed on February 1st, 1977. Janette was found lifeless in her Volkswagen Beetle, parked at an apartment complex where she had no known ties. The vehicle was located only minutes away from a bar she had visited with friends the previous night. Her body had been crammed into the tight space behind the front seats, suggesting an effort to conceal her. The authorities later confirmed that Janette had been indecently assaulted and strangled with a piece of her own clothing, specifically the sleeve of her shirt. The person responsible had also tried to burn the vehicle, possibly in an attempt to destroy evidence, but the fire never took. These disturbing details pointed to a violent and calculated act, yet the investigation quickly stalled due to a lack of immediate leads. Witnesses from the bar recalled that Janette left with an unknown man, assuring her friends she would return shortly. Her final words, "back in 10 minutes," were the last anyone heard from her. The investigators were given a description of the man, which was later turned into a composite sketch, but no one came forward to identify him. A carton of Eve cigarettes was retrieved from the vehicle among other items, yet the limited forensic tools of the time hindered deeper analysis. Despite the evidence gathered early on, the case eventually went cold. Nearly 5 decades passed without answers. The investigators from the Santa Clara County District Attorney's Cold Case Unit, working alongside the San Jose Police Department, took another look at the evidence from the 1977 crime scene. This time, they applied modern forensic methods that had not been available during the initial investigation. Their re-examination led to a breakthrough. A fingerprint on the pack of Eve cigarettes was reanalyzed and stood out as a potential lead. In August 2024, the fingerprint was matched to Willie Eugene Sims, a 69-year-old man living in Ohio. Back in 1977, Sims had been a 21-year-old private in the United States Army, stationed at Fort Ord in Monterey County, placing him in California at the time of the crime. The investigators traveled to Ohio to obtain a DNA sample directly from Sims. That, along with other existing pieces of evidence, began to form a solid case. DNA found under Janette's fingernails and on the shirt sleeve used to strangle her, along with the original sketch provided by her friends decades earlier, helped confirm the connection. Additional records reveal that Sims had a violent criminal history in 1978, just a year after Janette's demise. He was convicted in Monterey County for assault with intent to end someone's life and was sentenced to 4 years in state prison. Despite that conviction, he managed to avoid further legal trouble in the years that followed. After serving his time, he moved out of California long before the implementation of CODIS, the National DNA Database. So his DNA had never been added to the system. In May 2025, once the fingerprint match was confirmed and supported by DNA evidence, Sims was arrested in Jefferson, Ohio, and formally charged. If convicted, he faces a maximum sentence of 25 years to life in prison. After 48 long years, Janette's family finally received the news they had been waiting for. Her son, Alan Ralston, who was only 6 years old when his mother lost her life, expressed deep gratitude to the cold case investigators and law enforcement officials who never gave up. He shared that the arrest brought a sense of closure that had been missing for decades, offering his family long overdue peace after so many years spent living without answers. He said, what a great Mother's Day gift and birthday present rolled into one. He was only days away from his 55th birthday. My whole life I've never understood what Mother's Day even means. In August 1987, a husband returned to his quiet home in High Ampham, Northern California, to find his wife mysteriously missing. An anonymous package containing some of her skeletal remains were received, but decades would pass before this case was solved. In February 1993, a man walking along the beach at Trinidad Head on the California coast came across a human skull. At the time, the authorities were unable to identify the remains. A DNA profile was developed from the skull, but when checked against the combined DNA index system, no match was found and the case went cold. Decades later, in May 2025, Thanks to advances in DNA technology and the efforts of Othram DNA analysts, the identity of the skull was finally confirmed. It belonged to Kay Josephine Medine, Kay Adams, also known as Kay Medine, was born in 1939. Kay was a dedicated elementary school teacher who lived in Hyam Pem in Trinity County, Northern California. She worked at the Hyam Pem School and shared her life with her husband, Nicholas Medine. They were blessed with a daughter. The daughter's DNA was used in the identification. On August 3, 1987, Nicholas returned to his home after a business trip, only to discover that his wife Kay was missing. Upon entering their residence, he immediately noticed something was wrong. Kay's purse, glasses, and car were all still at the house, items she would not have left behind if she had gone anywhere voluntarily. Deeply alarmed, Nicholas contacted the authorities to report his 48-year-old wife as missing. He explained to law enforcement that he had been away and came home to an unsettling silence and no sign of Kay. The Trinity County Sheriff's Office responded swiftly, launching a search of the Medine property and the surrounding woods in the remote Hyampim area. Despite their efforts, no evidence of Kay's whereabouts was uncovered. As the investigation officially began, law enforcement focused on gathering as much information as possible. Friends, neighbors, and family members were interviewed to piece together Kay's last known movements. However, these conversations yielded no significant leads. Nothing in her behavior suggested that anything was amiss. Her sudden disappearance puzzled those closest to her. The absence of any signs of struggle or forced entry only deepened the mystery. As word of Kay's disappearance spread, the community rallied to support the search. Volunteers combed the rugged terrain surrounding the Medine home, navigating the dense forests and steep slopes of the Trinity Mountains. Despite the challenging environment and their best efforts, no trace of Kay was found. Each day that passed without answers only added to the growing sense of unease. Several months after Kay's disappearance, in November of 1987, the investigation took a grim turn. The Sheriff's Department in neighboring Humboldt County received a chilling package from an anonymous sender. Inside the package was a disturbing combination: an anonymous letter and some of Kay Adams' skeletal remains. The letter provided specific details, directing the investigators to the location of additional remains. Following the instructions in the letter, law enforcement officers traveled to a remote area near a road about 45 miles from Kay's home. There, they discovered more skeletal remains, believed to be connected to the missing teacher. These findings offered the first concrete physical evidence since Kay had vanished months earlier. Forensic experts confirmed the identity of the remains through dental records, putting an end to any uncertainty about who they belonged to. Despite this breakthrough, the cause of Kay's demise remained a mystery. The condition of the remains made it impossible for the investigators to determine how she had lost her life or what circumstances had led to her tragic fate. The discovery of Kay's remains did not lead to any arrests, and the case eventually went cold. In 1988, a certificate was officially issued for Kay. This legal step acknowledged her demise, despite the fact that she was still legally classified as a missing person. Finally, in 2025, the skull found in 1993 was identified. Authorities from the Humboldt County Sheriff's Office acknowledged the baffling nature of the case. They expressed uncertainty about how the majority of Kay's remains ended up 45 miles from her home, while her skull was found nearly 100 miles away on the coast. Nicholas, Kay's husband, passed away in 2018. Throughout the investigation, the police have stated that they do not consider him a suspect in her demise. The police have appealed to the public for any information that could shed light on Kay's disappearance and demise. They hope that someone, somewhere, might hold a crucial piece of information that can finally help solve the case. In the fall of 1997, skeletal remains were found near 43rd Street and 7th Avenue in Tampa, Florida. For more than 28 years, the identity of the man remained a mystery. Alongside the remains, the investigators found a valid resident alien card and social security card, offering a glimmer of hope in identifying the individual. However, that hope quickly faded as attempts to trace relatives or verify the documents hit an end. The cause of demise remained unknown, and with no clear direction, the investigation stalled. Even the involvement of the Mexican consulate in November 1997 yielded no helpful information. At the time, the authorities struggled to determine whether the man's demise had been natural, accidental, if he ended his own life, or if it is the result of foul play. For more than 28 years, the skeletal remains remained nameless. Despite periodic reviews, no new evidence surfaced. But recent advancements in forensic science have sparked renewed interest in forgotten cases like this one. The Hillsborough County Medical Examiner's Office, once limited by the technology of the 1990s, has embraced the growing field of DNA analysis and forensic genealogy. In early 2024, the Hillsborough County Medical Examiner's Office took a decisive step forward by reopening the decades-old case. This renewed effort came through a collaborative initiative with U.S. Customs and Border Protection's Missing Migrants Program and the Mexican Consulate. Rather than relying on forensic genealogy, the investigators employed routine DNA testing to pursue any potential familial connections. Their efforts paid off when they located a woman in Guanajuato, Mexico, who turned out to be the sister of the unidentified man. A cheek swab collected from her in August 2024 provided a long-awaited DNA match to the skeletal remains discovered in Tampa nearly 30 years earlier. In May 2025, with that DNA match, the authorities were able to confirm the identity of the deceased as Rodolfo Barcenas Guerrero. This breakthrough ended years of uncertainty, finally putting a name to the man whose remains had languished in anonymity since 1997. The Mexican consulate quickly stepped in to facilitate the next steps, working to ensure that Rodolfo's cremated remains would be returned to his family. Despite confirming his identity, the precise circumstances of his demise remain unsolved. The cause and manner of demise, originally deemed undetermined in 1997, still elude investigators today. Whether Rodolfo lost his life as a result of natural causes and accident, or under more suspicious circumstances, is something that remains a mystery. In December 1983, a person stepped into a quiet farmhouse in Walker, Iowa, only to find a horrifying scene. Despite an immediate investigation, the trail went cold for decades. Ronald Lee Novak was born on November 11, 1959, to Robert and Marguerite Novak in the southwest part of Cedar Rapids, Iowa. The youngest of 7 siblings, Ronald grew up surrounded by a large family in a working-class environment. He attended Jefferson High School and graduated in 1978. As the years passed, Ronald remained close to his roots. By the early 1980s, he had settled in a rural area near the small town of Walker, just outside Center Point, Iowa. There, he found work in construction and mechanical repair, relying on his hands and practical skills to make a living. The peaceful countryside offered him the solitude he appreciated, and he led a relatively low-profile life. Despite his preference for privacy, Ronald maintained close ties with his family and a tight circle of friends. By December 23, 1983, Ronald was anticipating the holidays. It was the eve of Christmas Eve, and he looked forward to celebrating with his loved ones. At 24 years old, he had plans to spend time with his family and his girlfriend. His girlfriend and his best friend, Dale Laver, were expected to visit him later that evening. On the morning of December 24th, life came to a shocking and violent end. A friend arrived at Ronald's home, only to discover a gruesome scene. Ronald was found deceased in an unheated room of the house, the victim of what appeared to be a robbery or burglary gone horribly wrong. His hands were bound behind his back, and his body showed signs of brutal trauma. He had been beaten repeatedly with 2 hammers and a golf club. Both weapons were still lying near his body, and he had been shot once in the upper right arm with a .22 caliber handgun. The brutality of the crime was jarring, but perhaps even more heartbreaking was the sight of Ronald's 3 loyal dogs. They huddled around his lifeless body in the frigid room, visibly shivering as they tried to offer him warmth, refusing to leave his side. The friend, shaken by what he saw, wasted no time and quickly alerted the local authorities. When the police officers arrived at the scene, they immediately recognized the magnitude of the violence that had taken place. An investigation was promptly launched, As the detectives surveyed the scene, they noted the signs of a fierce struggle. Blood was splattered throughout the room, indicating that Ronald had fought back. Nearby, his cordless telephone lay discarded near the golf club and hammers, as if he had attempted to call for help but was overpowered. His wallet was missing, a detail that pointed to theft as a motive. According to Ronald's brother Don Novak, Ronald typically carried several $100s in cash, money that was gone. The police also noticed a broken window in the kitchen door, suggesting that at least one of the attackers had tried to force entry there. Interestingly, that door remained locked, and Ronald's loaded shotgun, usually kept near the entrance, had not been used. This detail raised further questions about how the intruders had gained access and why Ronald, who was usually cautious, had not reached for his weapon. The investigators would later uncover even more troubling elements inside the home. In Ronald's bedroom, officers found a small suitcase containing $32,000 in cash and, nearby, a green duffel bag with $7,650 worth of marijuana. These discoveries introduced new dimensions to the case, suggesting possible motives beyond simple robbery. Still, with strong winds sweeping across the property, any trace evidence, especially footprints left by the perpetrators, was quickly erased. No fingerprints were recovered, and local neighbors reported they had neither seen nor heard anything unusual that night. The autopsy report confirmed the savagery of the attack. Ronald had lost his life from a combination of blunt force trauma, a gunshot wound, and exposure to the freezing temperatures. In the days that followed, the detectives questioned Ronald's known acquaintances and compiled a list of what they described as good suspects. Yet, despite the number of people interviewed and leads followed, law enforcement lacked the physical evidence necessary to make an arrest. The case would soon grow cold. Decades later, renewed efforts by the investigators led to significant progress in Ronald Novak's long unsolved case. Technological advances in DNA analysis allowed the authorities to re-examine key evidence collected at the crime scene in 1983. Specifically, preserved blood samples and one of the hammers used in the attack were submitted for modern forensic testing. By May 2025, a DNA match was made to 64-year-old Michael Shapert of Fairview, Oregon. The identification of Shapert was made possible through a combination of conventional laboratory testing and genealogical DNA techniques. Blood and touch trace DNA were discovered on Ronald's clothing, and one of the hammers believed to have been used in the fatal beating. These materials had been carefully preserved for more than 4 decades. DNA Labs International conducted the initial forensic testing, while Parabon Nanolabs provided genetic genealogy information that ultimately led the investigators to Shapard as a key suspect in the case. According to the investigators, evidence indicates that Shapard was not acting alone. The investigation suggests that Shapard, along with other unidentified individuals, likely went to Ronald's rural home with the intent to rob him of cash and marijuana. The large amount of money and substances found at the scene in 1983 supports this theory. What was intended as a robbery quickly escalated into a brutal and fatal attack, leaving Ronald bound, beaten, shot, and left to pass away in freezing conditions. In May 2025, Shapert was arrested in Oregon by a joint effort of federal and local law enforcement. He was formally charged in the first degree. Shapert was extradited to Lynn County, Iowa, where he is being held in the Lynn County Correctional Center. He is scheduled to appear in court for trial starting February 24, 2026. For Ronald's surviving family members, the news of an arrest has stirred both relief and grief. His sisters, who have endured decades without answers, expressed their deep emotional response to the development. One of them said the following, reflecting on the long years of uncertainty and pain, "It takes strength to endure such hardship." While Shapert awaits trial, the investigators continue to pursue leads related to the other individuals believed to have been involved. For Ronald's family, the hope is that full accountability will follow, and that the silence surrounding his demise will finally be broken. In March 1981, a 20-year-old woman vanished in the Las Vegas area. The case would take decades to be solved. Vicki Raidig was born in 1961 and spent her childhood in Boulder City, Nevada. not far from the bright lights of Las Vegas. Vicki attended Boulder City High School, where she built lasting connections and quietly moved through her school years with grace. She graduated in 1977. By early 1981, Vicki was 20 years old and had settled into life in the Las Vegas area. She found local employment. At this point in her life, Vicki was in a relationship with Walter Bradley DeMint. Details about the dynamics of their relationship remain limited, but it is clear that they spent time together and were romantically involved. In March 1981, Vicki was reported missing by her family. Concern quickly mounted when it became clear that Vicki had not returned home after going out with her boyfriend, Walter. Her family informed the police that she had last been seen with Walter, prompting the investigators to focus their early efforts on tracing her movements that day. The authorities invited him in for questioning shortly after the report was filed. During the interview, he claimed that the two had gotten into an argument and that Vicki had run off afterward. This explanation immediately raised concerns, but with no immediate evidence to contradict his story, the police had to proceed cautiously. Just 2 days after she was reported missing, Vicki's body was discovered in a remote desert area along Boulder Highway. The grim discovery confirmed her family's worst fears. The police quickly ruled that her life was ended after determining that she had suffered both blunt and sharp force trauma. Walter was named a person of interest early in the investigation. His story raised red flags with the detectives, particularly due to several inconsistencies in his account of the events leading up to Vicki's disappearance. Despite this, the investigators struggled to find physical evidence or witness testimony strong enough to formally charge him. The Henderson Police Department continued to investigate, but revealed little about the direction of their inquiries. They did not confirm whether any other suspects had been identified or seriously considered during the course of the case. With limited leads and no new breakthroughs, momentum slowly faded. Eventually, the case went cold. In 2021, for decades after the initial investigation into Vicki's case, new developments began to emerge. DNA swabs taken from her during the original autopsy were re-examined using modern forensic techniques. The testing revealed a match. Walter Bradley DeMint had contributed DNA found on the samples. This discovery marked a pivotal breakthrough in the long-dormant case. The momentum continued into 2022 and 2023 as the investigators submitted additional evidence from the original case for further forensic analysis. This second round of testing reinforced the initial findings, uncovering more DNA linked to both DeMint and Vicki. With these results, the investigators were able to strengthen the narrative that had long pointed to DeMint, but until then lacked the physical proof to support prosecution. Armed with this new evidence, the Henderson Police Department presented their findings to the Clark County District Attorney's Office. In April 2025, after reviewing the forensic results and the history of the investigation, the DA's office agreed with the police conclusions. DeMint was the only viable suspect ever identified in the case. The previously inconclusive suspicions had finally been backed by definitive scientific evidence. However, a crucial detail changed the course of what could have been a renewed legal process. The investigators learned that DeMint had passed away in 2007. His demise effectively closed the door on any possibility of prosecution. Despite this, law enforcement did not view the case as without purpose. The Henderson Police Department notified Vicki's family members of the recent findings. Alameda, California police have solved a crime 45 years after it happened, thanks to new technology. On March 16, 1977, Richard Bashelle was awakened by his 17-year-old son at 2:30 a.m. Richard Jr. worriedly told his father that he thought he heard a noise on the front porch of their home in Alameda, California. He was right. Outside, the pair saw a burglar casing the house. Richard and his son chased the burglar down the street. Richard Sr. was well ahead of his son. When his son caught up, he found his father stabbed 10 times on a sidewalk on Lincoln Avenue and the suspect gone. 43-year-old Richard, a U.S. Marine who fought in the Korean War, was transported to a local hospital where he succumbed to his injuries. Richard Jr. had the following to say about his father. "Dad was a good man. He would bend over backwards to help people out, even strangers. There was a possible suspect identified in the case, but due to limitation in DNA technology, charges could not be filed and the case went cold. 44 years after the crime happened, in 2021, the police department's cold case unit resubmitted a key piece of DNA evidence, a jacket that the suspect was wearing the night of the attack. A sample of blood from that jacket was sent to the Serological Research Institute in Richmond, which confirmed the blood belonged to the victim. The following year, in 2022, the case was finally cracked and the perpetrator was identified as Richard Curley Bernard, who was 23 years old at the time of the crime. On March 22, 2022, retired Alameda Police Department Detective Lorenzo Graham said during a news conference he had been arrested and convicted for a series of Alameda burglaries, along with 2 known assaults. The detectives said that they also found circumstantial evidence finally proving that Bernard, who was a suspect back in 1977, was in fact the perpetrator. Bernard, who spent much of his life in prison for dozens of burglary convictions, was later shot and slain in Texas in 1989. Alameda County Deputy District Attorney Mark Melton said, "The suspect is deceased, but the family of the victim now knows the identity of the perpetrator and that law enforcement never stopped looking for him." Richard Jr. said, "I am happy that we have got a final resolution to this. It has been on my mind for the last 45+ years. It has been a long, hard road, but I am glad we have a final resolution to this. On behalf of my family, my late mother, my 2 younger brothers, I would like to just say thank you to everyone. I do not know if there is any real closure. It does not change a whole lot, but we are glad that we do have a final positive ID." A young girl would lose her life, only for the detectives to learn that the perpetrator was very close to her. In March 2015, 18-year-old Angelica Hadel was supposed to be enjoying a relaxing spring break at home from her first year at college, but it turned into a tragedy when she went missing. AJ was going through a breakup at the time she returned home to Norfolk, Virginia, for spring break. This led her mother, Jennifer Wright, to believe that her daughter was blowing off steam when she went missing after sending a text that said she was out with friends. However, after AJ did not return home and her ex-boyfriend, Corey French, found a piece of her credit card in the road, the investigators began to search more urgently for the missing teenager. The investigators initially suspected Corey, who AJ's stepfather, Wesley Paul Hadel, had claimed had become obsessive over his stepdaughter. Wesley adopted AJ because AJ was getting her hermit, and she never used her biological dad's last name. Wesley, who had a criminal history, including convictions for bank robbery, breaking and entering and burglary, was proactive in the search for his missing stepdaughter. During the search, he was arrested for breaking into the home of a person, claiming he was suspicious that person had kidnapped AJ. He said the following after his arrest for breaking and entering: "I would do anything for my daughter, my wife, my kids, and they make it sound like I would do anything to keep myself out of trouble. I could not sit a minute away from where my daughter may have been." However, the investigation began to center around him. Wesley's co-workers told the police that he was visibly agitated and had to take the rest of the day off work, on the day his stepdaughter went missing. The investigators searched Wesley's Chevy Astro van and discovered a shovel, duct tape, and work gloves in the back of the car. They also had a look at Wesley's GPS system on his car, and that led them to an abandoned house 60 miles away from the family's home. On April 9th, AJ's body was then discovered hidden in a ditch behind the abandoned house. The autopsy discovered that she had been poisoned intentionally with a heroin overdose. AJ was a softball player at Longwood University with a bright future. Norfolk Police Detective David Benjamin said, after more than 3 years, on November 19, 2018, 40-year-old Wesley was charged with slaying after he kidnapped and poisoned AJ. This happened after an investigation into his involvement eventually led a judge to say there was overwhelming evidence against him. The police investigating the case said that he kidnapped AJ while she was folding laundry and listening to music in the living room. The prosecutors said that he then tried to distract the police by lying and planting evidence in various places, including one of her jackets at a friend's home. Wesley admitted to breaking into the home, but denied hiding the jacket there. In 2020, his first trial was declared a mistrial after 2 days. over disagreements on what evidence the jury should be allowed to hear. On January 28, 2022, in court, the first person to take the stand was Jennifer, AJ's mom. She said that she and Wesley met in 2010 and ended up getting married a month after they met. They have one child together who is 10 years old. Jennifer said that in 2015, she kicked Wesley out of the house because she found out he started using illegal substances. He then decided to stay at a hotel close to their home. Jennifer said that she even tried holding an intervention with Wesley, his mother, and his nephew. On March 2, 2015, she picked AJ up from college. AJ was a freshman, double majoring in information technology and computer programming. Jennifer said that on the day AJ disappeared, Wesley called her at work to drop his personal truck off and pick up his work truck. She said that she told him to leave the keys in the mailbox just in case AJ needed to go somewhere. When Jennifer arrived home, she testified that AJ was gone. However, her wallet and coat were still in the home. The family also noticed some clothes of AJ's were missing, and a note was left on the kitchen table. The note read, "With everything going on, it is a lot to deal with." Jennifer said that she questioned the note because it did not make sense to her or her other daughters. During the search for AJ, Wesley often received tips and would go investigate them. Jennifer said that every time she found something out, she would let an investigator know what they found. Jennifer said that Wesley tried to blame Corey, AJ's ex-boyfriend, for her disappearance. Jennifer confirmed that Wesley and AJ were close, and confirmed that she does not believe he ever assaulted, touched, or made inappropriate comments toward her. She said that she did feel uncomfortable when she found out that he was doing illegal substances. The man who said that he sold illegal substances to Wesley also testified and said that he had been selling Wesley cocaine and heroin for years. A tense moment arose when Zach Hoffer, AJ's stepfather before Wesley, was prepared to make a testimony before the judge's sentencing. Wesley's attorney, James Alinson, objected, in which the judge sustained the motion, after which Zach had to be forcibly removed by authorities from the courtroom after yelling expletives toward Wesley. On April 4, 2022, Wesley Hadel was sentenced to life in prison plus 15 years for ending AJ's life. The extra years is 5 years for concealing the body and 10 years for being caught with illegal substances while incriminated. Wesley continues to maintain his innocence. He again denied his involvement during a jailhouse interview by saying, "A house fire would end the life of a husband and father of 5. DNA technology would lead to the discovery of what truly happened on that day." On May 22, 2018, a fire was reported to Cannon City Fire at the home on the 1800 block of Pinion Avenue in Fremont County, Colorado. The firefighters then discovered the body of 76-year-old Kenneth Orchard in the charred interior of his own home, at the bottom of a stairwell near the front door. His wife, Laureen Orchard, was leaving her warm water therapy class when she got a call from a neighbor telling her that the fire department was at her house. According to an autopsy, Kenneth's cause of demise was strangulation and blunt force injuries. He had hemorrhages throughout his body and his eyes. On the inside of his lips, on the inside of his cheeks, his skull and his neck was fractured. Many witnesses came forward and told the investigators that they saw an unidentified male walking away from the Orchard residence on the morning of the fire. One witness told the investigators that she saw a male walking across Spring Creek Park around 200 yards from the fire. She told the investigators that he was in such a hurry and got into a white pickup truck and drove off. It was soon discovered that the white pickup truck was owned by Fremont Paving and Ready Mix. In April 2019, a former Fremont County Sheriff's deputy, Christopher Pape, was sentenced to 2 years in prison after pleading guilty to stealing silver ingots, nearly $6,000 in coins and other valuables from Kenneth's home while helping to investigate the case. The investigation was declared a fatal arson and a slaying, but it would take 2 years before a person would be charged in this case. DNA was found on an empty gas can on the house's front porch. In 2020, when tested, it matched to Matthew Rogers. The investigators also found items stolen from the Orchard home at Rogers' parents' home, as well as burnt items of clothing. He also worked at Fremont Paving and Ready Mix in 2018. Rogers was dealt a slew of charges, including first-degree arson, first-degree burglary, and slaying in the first degree. Court documents painted a clearer picture as to what happened to Kenneth the morning of May 22nd. According to the Fremont County Sheriff Alan Cooper, this was a burglary gone horribly wrong. Rogers intended to burglarize the home of Kenneth. Kenneth had returned to his home after having worked his shift at Big Burger World and then stopped by the Family History Center at his church. The investigators believe that Kenneth was returning to his home in the middle of the burglary and Rogers attacked. 2 fires were then set inside the house, one in the master bedroom on the 2nd floor and another right in front of the front door of the residence. Rogers was being held at the Fremont County Detention Center without bond. The investigators did not have to look far in order to make an arrest. He was already being held at the detention center for separate, unrelated domestic violence charges. On April 5, 2022, 47-year-old Matthew Rogers was found guilty of all charges. At the sentencing on May 23rd, before both the prosecution and defense made their final statements, members of Kenneth's family made impassioned and heartbreaking statements to senior Judge Plotz. All 5 of his children recounted the horrors they have each had to live through after the atrocious slaying of their father. Lanai, Kenneth's eldest daughter, said, "I am done giving time to the man who ended the life of my dad. He took time and memories that did not belong to him. I am not giving him any more with the exception of this hour." Kenneth's son and second child, Lynn, also had thoughts to share with the judge and those gathered. He recounted how alongside his newly widowed mother, he entered Walmart the day after the crime, in an attempt to gather her new belongings as her home was destroyed. He said, "Everything in the world my mother had was ripped from her. We stood in the clothing section of Walmart with an empty shopping cart, in shock, literally paralyzed by the magnitude of the task. How do you start there? What do you put into a shopping cart to rebuild a life?" Amy, the third child, said, "My whole world turned black. My face was black. My pants were black. My clothes were black. All my childhood memories were black. The windows were so black. And most of all, my heart was black." On May 22, 2018, Matthew Rogers gave me and my family a life sentence. A life sentence of trying to bring back color when we were given so much black. Lorene, Kenneth's wife of over 40 years, made her statement last. She said, "He was my best friend, husband, and companion. Where was my comfort and confidence? I needed Ken to help me cope with losing Ken." Rogers was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. The perpetrator would hear his fate 33 years after the crime took place. In May 1990, 20-year-old Susan Negersmith, from Carmel, New York, in Putnam County, was at the Jersey Shore in New Jersey with friends for Memorial Day weekend. She then went missing. The authorities found her body on May 27th behind a restaurant. Her demise had first been classified as accidental, but was later ruled a slaying. It was after a medical examiner who later studied autopsy photos, listed 26 points of trauma on the victim's body. She had also been assaulted. Neither evidence from the scene, which included scrapings from under her fingernails, nor police investigations, led to anyone being charged in her assault or demise, and the case went cold. 28 years later, in 2018, lab testing identified a person of interest, but then the authorities had to do the difficult job of finding a way to obtain his DNA. In June 2021, 3 years later, the DNA matched to Jerry Rosado. The Cape May County Prosecutor's Office then charged him in April 2022, when he was 62 years old, with assaulting Susan. He was not charged with her demise. In 2023, a state appeals court decision led to the dismissal of the charge due to the statute of limitations, and the state's highest court decided not to disturb that decision. At the trial level, Rosado's lawyers argued the statute of limitations at the time of the crime. In 1990 was 5 years and the clock had run out. The trial judge, though, denied the argument, saying the clock did not start until 2021, when the investigators made a DNA match, citing a 2002 change to the assault statute. Rosado's lawyers went to the appellate level, where a panel of judges reversed the trial judge, finding the statute of limitations was 5 years in 1990. The appeals decision explained how 2 changes to the assault law since then did not impact this case. First, in 1996, the statute of limitations for assault was removed, starting for cases that had not yet run out, as of May 1, 1996. In Susan's case, the statute of limitation for assault ended May 27, 1995. And in 2002, an amendment to the assault law provided for a time exception for cases involving DNA or fingerprint evidence. But the amendment provided for no retroactivity, nor does other case state and federal case law. The state Supreme Court quoted the 2023 appeals decision, which found the 2002 amendment could not reach back and constitutionally revive a statute of limitation that had already expired. The decision effectively ends the case against Jerry Rosado. Emily Negersmith, Susan's sister, said, "She was just a young girl, 20 years, down with her friends. She did not deserve this. No one deserves that." Dawn Negersmith, Susan's other sister, said, "You know, we just want it solved so we can have closure on this case." The Salt Lake City, Utah Police Department could finally announce the closure of a cold case from 48 years ago. On February 28, 1974, 39-year-old James Bednarik was shot and lost his life at his own home in Salt Lake City, Utah. As part of the investigation, the investigators developed a profile about James. Through their research, the investigators discovered that he was selling stolen gasoline. The police discovered that a year prior to his end, James had gotten into a dispute with an owner of a gas station over stolen gas. James then shot and injured the owner as a result of the argument. In the investigation of who ended James' life, all available leads were explored by the detectives. However, the police were unable to identify the suspect and the case went cold. 44 years later, in 2018, the squad from the Salt Lake City Police Department used new forensic technology to test the evidence. However, no new leads were generated as a result of the test. In 2022, 4 years later, 2 retired police detectives, while having lunch, discussed the case. Eventually, the 2 detectives learned that George B. Toone had confessed to ending the lives of 2 men in Salt Lake County, including James Bednarik, at the request of the gas station owner. The detectives then requested the Salt Lake City Police Department Crime Lab to perform a forensic test on 2 latent fingerprints collected at the crime scene in 1974. Then those fingerprints came back to Toone. SLCPD Chief Mike Brown said in a press release, "And care both active and retired officers have in these cases. I am proud of our detectives. They never let up in their pursuit of justice." Based on the evidence they have in the case, Salt Lake City Police said that the detectives are confident that Toone was responsible for the end of James. Toone was hiding as he waited for James to return home in the 500 block of East 1st Avenue and then executed him. Toone lost his life on September 11, 2011, at 75 years old due to natural causes. In 2015, another case was linked to Toone. On October 28, 1976, 47-year-old rancher William Erkenbrack was shot in the back of the head with a high-powered rifle as he was opening the gate to his ranch in Clarks Canyon, Utah. If he were still alive, they would have had enough evidence to charge Toone. Blaine Erkenbrack and Bill Erkenbrack, Williams' family, said in a statement at the time, the modus operandi in each slaying was startlingly similar. James' family has been notified of the status in the case. The police are still continuing to investigate the reports that Toone ended a second person's life in Salt Lake County. A drive-by shooting would lead to a confession and the arrest of 3 people. On November 9, 2018, 23-year-old Tavant White and 21-year-old Alicia Justice were found deceased in a crashed black Honda Accord that hit a cement wall of the Natchez Stew Pot in Mississippi. When the Natchez police arrived on the scene, they discovered that the vehicle had been shot at several times. The police obtained surveillance footage from multiple cameras located near the scene and identified the vehicle from which the bullets were fired as a silver and gray 2008 Chevrolet. Tavant was under grand jury indictment for armed robbery and possession of a weapon by a convicted felon. He had been shot before and no arrests were made in those shootings because Tavant did not cooperate with the investigators. The case would only be solved more than 2 years later when the police arrested 18-year-old Jameco Davis and 23-year-old Kendarius Davis and Jack Lawrence Jackson. The fourth person, Michaelaus Johnson, is deceased. In February 2021, Kendarius Davis was in the Adams County Jail undergoing questioning about a separate incident. During an interview with the investigators, he confessed to having information about the slaying of Tavant and Alicia. Warrants were issued for Jackson and Jamaica Davis. Jackson denied any involvement in the crime and claimed to be with his girlfriend on the night of the crime. Jameco Davis also denied any involvement in the crime and claimed to have been in Texas during the time of the crime. However, when the investigator showed Jameco Davis an Instagram video made on the day of the shooting, showing him and Kendarius Davis together and bragging about the crime, he admitted it was him in the video, but denied any involvement in the shooting. On October 10, 2021, Kendarius Davis recanted his original statement implicating Jameco Davis and Jackson. Instead, he offered up the names of 3 others as being responsible. On March 7, 2022, Kendarius Davis recanted his recantation, claiming he did so because he feared for his life. They knew Tavant White and started shooting when they saw him driving past them. On June 24th, Jackson and Jameco Davis were sentenced to 2 life sentences to run concurrent with each other, plus another 10 years for firearm enhancements. Kendarius Davis entered a plea to second-degree slaying. He has not been sentenced yet. On January 19, 2024, the firearm enhancement convictions were vacated for Jackson and Jameco Davis. However, it affirmed the life sentence given to each of them. They appealed their sentence, claiming that the firearms enhancement was illegal, that the trial court did not follow proper procedure, and that the verdict was against the overwhelming weight of the evidence. Further, Jackson claimed in his appeal that Judge Blackwell erred in not separating his trial from Davis's. The court agreed with the firearm enhancement portions of the sentences and vacated those, but found that all other issues were without merit. Christine Jessup in the peaceful, tight-knit community of Queensville, Ontario. The small town had an idyllic sense of safety, with familiar faces and unlocked doors. Parents like Janette Jessup often allowed their children to play outside without worry, trusting that their small town would keep them safe. On Wednesday, October 3, 1984, Janet didn't feel the need to rush home to greet her 9-year-old daughter, Christine Jessup, when school let out. Life in Queensville was so tranquil that such a routine felt entirely normal until Christine never came home that day. Christine Jessup was an adventurous and independent child full of curiosity and imagination. She enjoyed exploring the graveyard behind her home, spending hours lost in her own world. Like her older brother Kenny, Christine had a passion for baseball, but her true love was for animals. She found comfort and companionship in her dog, Freckles, and even kept a pet frog named Harold, which she housed in the damp, earthy basement of her home. Christine's playful spirit and love for animals painted a picture of a young girl with a deep sense of wonder and attachment to the world around her. On October 3, 1984, Christine Jessup returned home from school, filled with excitement to share her impressive music class records with her mother and brother. She knew that her father, Bob Jessup, would not be home, as he was serving an 18-month jail term for defrauding elderly family friends and was incarcerated at the Toronto East Detention Center. Upon entering the family's 2-story farmhouse, quickly realized that neither her mom nor her brother was home. Despite this, her cheerful demeanor likely remained as she awaited their return, unaware of the tragic events that were about to unfold. Christine wasn't overly concerned. She found a coin in the change jar and decided to head to the nearby store to buy a pack of gum. Before I continue, I want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch my videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy my content, consider subscribing. It's free and you can always change your mind later. Now let's move on with the video. Earlier that day, she had made plans to meet her friend, Leslie Chipman, at the park just across the street from the store around 4 p.m. At exactly 4 p.m., Christine arrived at the park, excited to meet her friend, unaware that this would be the last time she was seen. As planned, Leslie Chipman went to the park and waited for Christine to show up. Meanwhile, 10 minutes past 4 p.m., Janette Jessup arrived home with her son Kenny. She noticed Christine's red bicycle lying on its side outside the home, and its kickstand was damaged. Upon entering the house, they noticed that Christine's jacket was hanging on a hook that was higher than she could normally reach. The mail and newspaper had been brought inside, and her school bag was placed neatly on the counter. As the sun began to set around 5 p.m., Christine still hadn't returned home, which was unusual for her. This raised immediate concerns, as she was typically prompt and dependable. A panicked Janette decided to go look for her in the areas she loved to hang out. She went to the park and the graveyard, calling out her daughter's name. She placed a call through to Christine's friends, not excluding Leslie Chipman. Leslie, however, told Janette that she had planned a park date with Christine, but she never showed up, so she went home after waiting for hours. On hearing this, Janette tried so hard not to panic, but it seemed impossible. Janette felt a deep sense of unease. She and Christine shared a close bond, doing everything together. Though she allowed her children some freedom, she always knew where they were. Now, as the hours passed with no word from Christine, she began to regret not being home in time to greet her daughter after school. That feeling of unease quickly grew into a sharp worry, as something just didn't feel right. Just 20 minutes of delay was all it took for Christine, her sweet, sensitive, feisty, adorable daughter, to disappear with no trace. The day was getting dark, and Janette decided to call the York Regional Police for help. At the time, children going missing was a common case, but the cases were always solved with answers provided within 48 hours. Parental abduction or child runaway was more often than not the usual explanation for a missing child at the time. But in the case of Christine Jessup, both scenarios did not make any sense. Both of her parents were accounted for, and Christine was never a type of child to run away from home. Back then, whenever Christine went to spend the weekend with her grandparents, she would always call home to hear her family's voices and say hello. In the 1980s, the York police force was small, with only one officer for every 860 residents. There were no specialized units for major crimes, and the force had never dealt with a case involving child kidnapping or murder. Their inexperience quickly became evident as they took on the case, leading to complications in the investigation from the outset. According to reports, when a police arrived at the Jessup's house, he removed Christine Jessup's jacket from the hook for closer inspection. Investigators were also said to have come in through the back and side doors of the house. The plastic bag used to wrap the newspaper was also thrown in the trash without being checked for fingerprints, which could possibly belong to the killer. Also, the Jessup's home was not restricted as a crime scene, as neighbors were seen coming in and out of the home, unintentionally touching one or two things that might have compromised any kind of crucial evidence if Christine Jessup had been abducted from her home. The police set up a search party which also included residents of Queensville to help carry out a series of random searches of the area. The search yielded no results. Christine was never found. It was as if she had vanished from the surface of the earth without a trace. Her disappearance shocked the people of Queensville, who were used to looking out for one another. The community was left in disbelief, wondering how a 9-year-old girl could simply disappear without a single clue. According to Mark Johnson, one of the search party volunteers, the residents of Queensville were full of anxiety and concern. In her words, she said, "There is a feeling of disbelief that something like this could happen here." Due to how severe the situation was, Bob Jessup was later released from jail on humanitarian grounds. Bob and Janette then pleaded with the public to help in their daughter's return. The police knew that kidnappings are not just done randomly. The police believed that Christine Jessup's abduction was likely committed by someone who had an existing connection with the family. They asked the Jessups to provide a list of people who had access to their home when no family members were around. One of the names provided was Calvin Hoover, a close family friend who worked with Bob Jessup. Just a day after Christine's disappearance, Calvin's wife, Heather Hoover, traveled to Queensville to offer comfort and support to Janet, helping the family in any way she could. Sergeant Raymond Bunce of the York Police had an interview with Heather. Her alibi was that she was at her workplace on the day of Christine Jessup's disappearance. When asked about the whereabouts of her husband on that day, she said Calvin Hoover had been at work too. After responding to every question thrown at her, Heather took permission to leave, telling the officer that her husband and her children were home waiting for her and that she needed to hurry home. However, Calvin Hoover was never interviewed. Calvin Hoover was a man with dark hair, protruding front teeth, and a slim face, which appeared even slimmer when he wore his oversized glasses. At the time of Christine Jessup's murder, he was a 28-year-old tradesman from Scarborough with a penchant for drinking, partying, and gambling. Despite his flaws, Hoover had a certain charm that filled the room when he entered. To strangers and co-workers, he appeared friendly. But those who knew him more intimately described him as a selfish person, more concerned with his own interests than others. He also had a tendency toward revenge, a trait that became evident to his close family in France. Calvin Hoover met his wife, Heather, in the mid-1970s. After they got married, Calvin adopted Heather's 2 boys, and later they had 2 more boys together. Their small home was located in a housing development just west of the Toronto Zoo. Calvin and Heather Hoover worked at Eastern Independent Telecom, a small communications firm in Markham that supplied telephone wiring for businesses all over the area. While Heather worked in the dispatch department, Calvin worked in the installations under Bob Jessup, Christine's father, who was the lead installer at the time. Calvin Hoover's job, which allowed him to move around freely, gave him the opportunity to leave work for hours at a time without providing an explanation. Over time, he developed a close friendship with Bob Jessup, and the 2 families frequently gathered for barbecues and birthday parties. Janet and Heather also grew close, forming a strong bond and finding in each other a best friend. Janet had even nicknamed Heather. She jokingly called her the Goofy Newfie. Also, Heather Hoover would many a times babysit Christine Jessup, who often called her Auntie Heather. Regardless of the 50 kilometers distance between the 2 families' homes, Janet and Heather would frequently meet to catch up over a pot of tea and watch their children play. They had even had one of such visit 2 days before Christine disappeared. On the October 1st, 1984, Janet Jessup took her 2 kids, Kenny and Christine, to go visit the Hoovers. Lately, she had been exhausted, taking care of 2 children while her husband was in jail. She needed moral support and felt her friend, Heather, could give her some encouraging words. When she arrived at the Hoovers' home, Janet told Heather that she and Kenny would be going to visit Bob in jail in 2 days. It is, however, possible that Calvin Hoover overheard Janet's conversation with his wife and knew Christine would be home alone. Or maybe Heather Hoover had innocently told Calvin what Janet had said about going to visit her husband with Kenny. Either way, 2 days later, on the October 3rd, 1984, Calvin Hoover decided to do the unthinkable. The theory was that since Christine Jessup knew Calvin Hoover as a family friend, she probably entered his car without much convincing. He probably told her he was driving her to where her family was, which of course, she would have been excited about. Days went by without the Jessup's family, and the police knowing that the culprit was right under their noses. The case went cold for a while, and all the Jessups did was to pray for the safe return of their daughter and sister. Christmas came, but without Christine around, the Jessup's house didn't feel like celebrating. No Christmas tree, and Kenny only got few presents. By the time it was December 31st, 1984, 3 months later, while people prepared to enter into the new year in the village of Sunderland, just 56 kilometers east of Queensville, a man named Fred Patterson and his 2 daughters had gone looking for their dog on the large, wooded property next to their house. A while later, Patterson could spot something unfamiliar that looked like a heap of garbage beside a half-dug pit. On getting closer, he realized with horror that it was a badly decomposed corpse of a little girl. The corpse had suffered deep multiple stab wounds to the chest, and these, according to the medical examiner, were later determined to be the official cause of death. The body wore a beige turtleneck sweater with a blue pullover and a blouse with missing buttons. Close to the body's right foot was a pair of little girl's panties. A recorder which had the name Christine Jessup written on it was also found laying in a tall grass. When Christine's family heard the sad news, they became inconsolable. Their painful waiting and wondering had come to an end, but now there is a lifetime of mourning ahead. Since body was found in Durham region, the case was transferred from the York Police to the Durham Regional Police, where Inspector Robert Brown then began handling the case. Questions such as why Christine's body was found in Sunderland bugged the police. Sunderland was all country roads, farmland and forests, which was not really far or close from Queensville. The police was not aware that Calvin Hoover must have chosen that area to commit his atrocities because of his familiarity with the area. He was said to have had a school friend who lived just a few kilometers away from the crime scene. Calvin and his friend would often meet to go kayaking and backcountry camping. Calvin already knew the area like the palm of his hands. He chose to take Christine few meters into the dense forest where he would not be interrupted or seen by passing motorists. Inspector Brown worked day and night on the case. He divided his detectives into two teams. They worked tirelessly to find the culprit. They followed all leads except the accumulated boxes of notes containing leads from the York Regional Police investigation. This box had a notebook in which the name and address of Calvin Hoover was written, but investigators from the Durham Regional Police disregarded the work of the York Regional Police, saying their efforts to the case was amateurish and a waste of time. They, however, followed all other leads like the family friend who had uttered strange dark sayings, a kid in the neighborhood who always carried a knife, and even Jane Jessup, but none of these leads gave the answers they wanted. During the investigation, Calvin Hoover's name never came up. On February 14, 1985, Fitz and Shep, who were detectives in one of the teams assigned to the case, visited Christine's family and asked for another list of suspects, people they think could have harmed their daughter. The Jessups, however, could not easily name anyone, but the detectives pressed harder. Just over the fence of their home lived a tight-knit family called the Morans. They had a 25-year-old young boy named Guy Paul. He was kind and respectful and had no criminal record. Guy Paul was never one to drink or smoke. The only law violations he had were only a couple of speeding tickets. However, Janet recollected that Guy Paul did not participate in the search for Christine Jessup when almost everyone in Queensville had. Guy Paul, who played the clarinet and kept honeybees, was regarded as a weird type of guy by the detectives. The Morans were practically good with handiworks. The Moran family, known for their kindness and trustworthiness, was well regarded in the neighborhood. Alphonse Moran, the father, was a retired engineer, Army veteran, and college instructor who preferred to handle all home repairs himself, often with the help of his 6 children. A few weeks before Christine Jessup disappeared, Janet Jessup had asked the Morans if she could list their name and address as an emergency contact for Christine at school. Alphonse Moran gladly agreed. Guy Paul Moran was the second youngest of the Moran children. He possessed the same intelligence as his father. Alphonse taught Guy Paul to weld when he was just 10 years of age. He would often ask his son to assemble some mechanical clocks he had intentionally scattered. They often worked together fixing cars at their backyard. Guy Paul was a young man who loved woodworking and unraveling puzzle-like problems that required patience and focus. He possessed a photographic memory. He often retained the serial numbers of his favorite possessions in case they got stolen. By the time Christine Jessup went missing, Guy Paul was in 3 bands. He loved music and was a prodigy on the clarinet. On February 22, 1985, Detectives Fitz and Shep went over to the Morans and engaged Guy Paul in a conversation. He was invited into their car for a casual chat. Guy Paul was asked how well he knew Christine Jessup. He said he did not know her that well. He said there was a huge age gap between the both of them. Christine was more than 16 years his junior, so they never had much cause for interaction. He claimed to have once helped her catch Freckles, her dog, who was running loose. He also recalled talking about gardening to her. And the last interaction he ever had with the Jessups was when he had gone over to help relight the pilot on their furnace. The investigators questioned him about his whereabouts on the day Christine disappeared. Moran said he had been at work, a furniture manufacturing facility at Steeles and Weston, 57 kilometers to the south. However, Detectives Fitz and Shep later discovered that Guy Paul had left work early around 3:32 p.m. That meant he could have returned home no earlier than 4:14 p.m., which appeared to be too late to kidnap Christine Jessup before Janet and Kenny got home at 4:10 p.m. They further asked him why he never helped with the search for Christine. Guy Paul Moran said that if Christine's family had asked him, he would have gladly joined in the search, but, at the time, he and his father were installing weeping tile around the home's foundation. Guy Paul's explanation made sense and his alibi was rock solid, but Fitz and Shep saw him as a suspect who was guilty. The detectives further engaged Guy Paul in a playfully conversation, asking him what he thought about Christine Jessup. Guy Paul Moran described her as sweet and innocent. However, he innocently added the statement, but they sometimes grow up to be corrupt, which in a general sense, he is right. As girls become adults, they lose their childlike innocence. But to the detectives, Guy Paul had an evil motive to tarnish Christine's innocence. After their conversation, Guy Paul went home and continued with his normal life. In weeks following Christine Jessup's murder, Calvin Hoover kept his mouth shut. He had the guts to also show up for Christine's funeral and wake, blending with the crowd and offering his condolences to the family. Calvin Hoover was detectives' worst nightmare. He had no criminal background and did not show any form of perverseness. He was not loud or boastful. He made sure he did not draw attention to himself. He seemed careful enough not to have been seen picking up Christine Jessup after school, but at the same time, Calvin Hoover perpetrated his crime in a hurry that he had left a trail of leads. His semen was on Christine's panties, and a single dark hair was found in her necklace. The hair strand was taken to the forensic for testing, but with the intention of finding a match to Guy Paul's DNA. Guy Paul Moran, who had gone to his jazz group for rehearsals, was told that the band leader's daughter, accompanied by her friend and classmate, who happened to be an undercover police officer, was doing a cosmetics class project on hair analysis. She asked people in the jazz group if they would not mind her plucking a few strands of everyone's hair. Guy Paul Moran, who loved her eyes, did not even mind at all. She plucked everyone's hair but later discarded them except for Moran's. The undercover police then handed over Moran's hair to her colleagues Fitz and Shep, who took it to the Center of Forensic Sciences for DNA testing. The forensic scientist never really engaged in any DNA testing. She only microscopically compared the hair color from Christine's necklace to Moran's and concluded that the match was consistent. This was all Detective Shep, and Fitz needs to arrest the wrong guy. In the evening of April 22, 1985, Guy Paul Moran was on his way to band practice when he saw police flashing lights in his rear-view mirror. He thought he was being pulled over because he wasn't wearing his seatbelt. He did not have an idea that 14 other police officers were around the area. 2 cops approached his car, and he was surprised to recognize the detectives he had spoken to about Christine Jessup's weeks before. Thinking it was nothing to stress about, he greeted them, "What's up, guys?" In response, Fitz and Shep told him they were arresting him for the murder of Christine Jessup. A baffled Moran exclaimed, "What? It seems you're describing a dramatic turn of events in the story." As Guy Paul Moran was brought in for questioning, he realized that the situation was spiraling out of control. In his mind, he had made an honest mistake, but now he was facing the full force of the law for a crime he had no part in. Meanwhile, Calvin Hoover, likely keeping tabs on the investigation into Christine Jessup's murder, picked up the newspaper 2 days after Moran's arrest and was shocked to see the headline, "Musician who lives next door charged with Christine Jessup murder." This could be a turning point as Hoover's connection to the case deepens, and the true culprit is yet to be revealed. I bet at that point, he was relieved to see that the search for the real killer would stop for a while or even forever. His wife, Heather Hoover, who had kept a photo of Christine that the little girl had given her, often visited her at the cemetery. During her visit, Calvin would stay by her side, giving out words of comfort as she mourned. After Moran's arrest, Bob and Janet Jessup were shocked by the news that their daughter's killer had been just over the fence of their home. In an interview with the media, Janet said, "Last summer, they came over and gave us honey from their bees. They were so good to us. That's why it's such a shock. For Detectives Fitz and Shep, the easy part of finding a suspect was done. The difficult part was finding strong evidence that could convict Guy Paul Moran for Christine Jessup's murder. They reviewed Moran's rock-solid alibi and concluded that he couldn't have traveled the 57 kilometers from work to his home in time to kidnap Christine Jessup before Janet, and Kenny arrived home at 4:10 p.m. They then retraced Janet and Kenny's route on the day Christine went missing and suggested that Janet must have forgotten the exact time she came home. Janet, however, denied forgetting because she immediately looked at the wall clock when she walked into the house. As time went by, the detective's constant pressure eventually made her review her timing. She then said she returned home around 4:35 p.m. At trial, the prosecutor tabled flimsy evidence just to crown Guy Paul Moran as the murderer he is not. A cigarette, but that was found next to Christine's body, was almost presented as an evidence until investigators realized that Moran never smoked. The Moran family, however, told the court that their son had not arrived home on the day Christine went missing until 5:30 p.m., and that was because he had stopped for groceries and gas after work. But a psychologist who interviewed the Moran family testified that they were a part of a secretive, protective, pathological family system. The police planted an undercover police sergeant named Gordon Hobbs in Moran's cell. He came back to court days later with untrue stories. He said Moran had made stabbing motions toward his own chest, demonstrating the way he had killed Christine Jessup. As if that wasn't enough, Gordon Hobbs also allegedly said that Moran had confessed by saying that he would red rum the innocent. According to Moran, this story was horribly twisted. He said Hobbs had asked him what his favorite movie was, and he had told him about the 80 horror film named The Shining, in which a little boy repeatedly croaks red rum in the scariest scene of the movie. Red rum is the backwards spelling of murder. Since Moran couldn't remember the title of the movie at the time, he referenced red rum instead. This allegation appeared to seal the fate of Moran to the extent that his lawyer was afraid they would lose the case. After the first trial phase, he was declared not guilty, but, with no other suspect and the people of Queensville being afraid for their children's life, the verdict was appealed and he was then scheduled for another trial. This time, Moran, who was then 32 years, was however sentenced to life in prison. The judge asked him if he had any comment. Moran repeated the same thing he had been saying since the day he was arrested on the way to his band practice. In his words, Moran said, "I am not guilty of this crime. It's a travesty of justice what's happened today. I'm appealing." Moran was however handcuffed and taken to the Elgin Middlesex Detention Center in London, where he stayed for a while until he was brought to the federal prison. During the time Guy Paul Moran was given a life sentence, Calvin Hoover and his family lived in a two-story home in Oshawa and were slowly drowning in debt. In the year 1991, Calvin Hoover had declared bankruptcy, owing $28,000 against assets of just $11,000 aside this. He battled different diseases which included undiagnosed bipolar disorder, depression, and panic attacks. He would often use alcohol and drugs for temporarily relief. While Guy Paul Moran was imprisoned, other inmates saw him as the bigger sinner compared to all of them because he was convicted of child rape and murder, and they all wanted to deal with him for such convictions. Luckily for him, the most feared inmate had listened to his story and believed he was innocent. He then told other inmates not to lay their hands on Moran. Even at that, his life was still in danger. He was getting threats from every corner of the prison. He could not go anywhere without the most powerful inmates. Moran passed time in prison reading geography books that made him imagine he was traveling around the world and not stuck in one position. In 1993, while some people believed he committed the crime, majority of the people in Ontario believed he was innocent and should be freed on bail. Moran had a glimmer of hope again. He then hired a new lawyer, James Lockyer, and a co-counsel, Joanne McLean. Moran was granted bail in February 1993 after his lawyer successfully filed for appeal. At that point, Moran had spent 2.5 years in courtrooms and almost 18 months locked away in 6 different facilities. His parents, Alphonse and Ida Moran, had mortgaged their home many times in order to keep up with their son's legal bills, which amounted to roughly $500,000. Guy Paul Moran's appeal was set to begin in January of 1995. His lawyers went over his previous trials, and at a point, they became aware of the significant breakthroughs in DNA. All evidence gathered from Christine's crime scene were tested again. Christine's panties alongside Moran's DNA were sent to a forensic lab. Few days before the trial, there was news from the lab saying the semen on Christine's panties does not match Guy Paul Moran's DNA. 3 days later, after this was confirmed, Moran was proven innocent and set free. All charges against him were dropped and his criminal record wiped. Guy Paul Moran was given a sum of $1,200,000 in settlement by the Ontario government. He could have gotten more if he had pursued a trial, but he had been in enough courtrooms and knew how slow the system is. It would have taken him years to receive a settlement. Calvin Hoover, increasingly paranoid and consumed by fear, couldn't shake the thought that the walls were closing in on him. His habitual trips to the local pubs to drown his anxieties became his only solace. But even then, he couldn't escape the dread that came with knowing that Guy Paul Moran's acquittal meant the search for the real killer would soon intensify. Hoover's mind raced, haunted by the knowledge that his careless actions at the crime scene had left behind crucial evidence that DNA science could soon uncover. Regret knotted him as he recalled not having disposed of Christine Jessup's body properly, a mistake he would soon come to regret even more. With every passing day, the pressure mounted, and Hoover knew it was only a matter of time before the police came for him. By 1996, Calvin Hoover and his family had moved to a low-rent housing complex in Ajax. Their marriage was threatening to break up. At this point, the Hoovers were no longer in contact with Bob and Janet Jessup, who had divorced. Calvin Hoover got deep into gambling and doing drugs. One night, he had gotten drunk and had crashed his truck. He was charged with a DUI and his license was confiscated for a year. This was the last straw for Heather Hoover, who soon divorced him. Calvin Hoover continued chasing work, women, gambling, and drugs. He had a strong relationship with his coworker from Burlington named Joan Rocca. They both shared a likeness for gambling and had strong connection. In 2003, they got married in Las Vegas. However, his happiness was short-lived as Joan died of natural causes in 2009, not having the opportunity to know what kind of monster her husband was. Calvin Hoover was haunted by so many demons. He had sleepless nights, torture thoughts, depressive episodes, and panic attacks. It was too much that he attempted to end it all in 2014. He tried committing suicide by motor vehicle, but he survived it. Steve Smith, a Toronto police detective, was a 13-year-old kid in 1984 when Christine Jessup was murdered. Smith, who grew up in Hamilton playing all sort of games with his best friends, could remember when Christine Jessup went missing, and after many years, he still couldn't get his mind off the case. In the year 1996, he joined the Toronto police and had since then helped solve some of the worst cases in the country. When Smith was transferred to the homicides department in 2019, he quickly showed interest in cold cases. In his words, he said, "These families have waited so long for answers." Since the Durham police had flawed the Christine Jessup's case, it was transferred to the Toronto police. Smith brought in more staff to assist with the case. They followed so many leads and struck out lists of 300 people through DNA. Nothing worked. However, in May 2019, Smith heard about a 2-week forensic genealogy seminar being held at the Ontario Police College. Smith did not know much about forensic genealogy, but he knew the process was successfully used a year earlier to solve a case. Before now, the process of forensic genealogy had never been tested in Canada, but when Smith received authorization from Toronto police to try out genetic testing on a cold case, he opted for the Christine Jessup's case. Smith then submitted the DNA from Christine's underwear to Othram Incorporated, a Texas-based genetic testing firm, which generated a profile and uploaded it to a database called Getamatch. They began fleshing out a family tree to narrow down the suspect. This process was time and money consuming, but Detective Smith never gave up. After turning a family maze into a family tree of 33,000 descendants, the genealogist was however able to pinpoint Calvin Hoover as the owner of the sperm on Christine's underwear. Smith could not recognize the name. He went through Christine's case file and saw that he was never mentioned as a suspect. Hoover knew the Jessup's family so well and often had access to their homes, but the police never interviewed him for over 3 decades. Smith typed Calvin Hoover's name into 2 different police databases called CPIC and Versadex to figure out where he lived and whether he had a criminal record. However, Detective Steve Smith soon learned that Calvin Hoover had died in 2015. 4 years before Steve Smith joined the homicide department, Calvin Hoover, who lived outside of Port Hope in a small bungalow with one of his sons, was a sad, anxious, isolated man. At a point, his doctor had prescribed him a depressant called clonazepam for his anxiety and panic attacks, but it never worked. According to one of his sons, Calvin Hoover had said the pills were messing with his head. One day, the son who lived with him went out to a wedding. Hoover, who was home alone, opened a bottle of red wine, stepped into the garage, sealed the door with tape, put headphones over his ears, and switched on the generator, allowing carbon monoxide fill up the garage. When his son arrived, he found his father slumped dead over the lawn chair where he sat with an open bottle of his sedatives. In the bathroom of the main bedroom, his family discovered a yellow sticky note against the mirror with the words, "Hope you all have a good life." Calvin Hoover decided to be a coward to end it all without using his final moment to confess his crime and exonerate Guy Paul more than once and for all. He did not even think of giving his former friends, Bob and Janet Jessup, a peaceful end to their mystery. He took the secret to his grave. Detective Steve Smith was heartbroken when he discovered Hoover died 4 years earlier. It meant he would never face the consequences for his evil act. In order to conclusively determine if Calvin Hoover was the killer of Christine Jessup, Smith and his team went to the coroner's office where Calvin Hoover's blood samples had been retrieved after his death. DNA from the blood samples was then tested for a match to the DNA on Christine Jessup's underwear. The results came out a match. Finally, after 36 years, detectives were able to deliver the news of who killed Christine Jessup to her family and friends. Heather Hoover, on hearing the news about her ex-husband's evil act, said 10 years. "He didn't show shit. He didn't show nothing. How does somebody do that?" Janet Jessup's words carried the weight of a mother's pain. Relief that the mystery had been solved, yet haunted by the unshakable truth that her daughter could never come back. Kenny Jessup's statement reflected the complexity of their emotions, a bittersweet mixture of relief and sorrow. To learn that the killer was someone they had trusted, someone close to their family, made the pain even deeper. It was a cruel twist of fate that the person who had been among their circle was the one who had taken Christine's life. The emotional toll of the case was not only about the loss of Christine, but the betrayal that came with it, further complicating the healing process. Bob Jessup's words reflected the deep pain and anger that had been carried for years, knowing the truth about his daughter's killer, but feeling helpless for so long. His expression of wanting justice in the most raw and visceral way highlighted the immense grief and frustration he had endured. Meanwhile, Guy Paul Moran's response, despite the years of suffering he had experienced, was remarkably composed. He expressed relief that the Jessups would finally have closure, but also conveyed a sense of inevitability, as if he had always known the truth would eventually surface. While the justice system had failed him, Moran's grace in the face of years of wrongful accusations stood in stark contrast to the man who had taken Christine's life. Moran's words echoed the profound relief he felt after the truth finally came to light. While the justice system had initially failed him, the breakthrough in forensic science proved his innocence, allowing him to reclaim his life. His community and loved ones shared in that relief, as they knew Guy Paul Moran had never been the monster he was painted to be. At the same time, the memory of Christine Jessup, a bright, compassionate young girl with a love for life, her family, school, and sports remained etched in the hearts of those who knew her. Though her life was tragically cut short, she would always be remembered for the joy and warmth she brought to those around her. William and Ina Campbell. William and Ina Campbell, a couple in their 80s, lived peacefully in their home on Jackson Road in Clarksville, Tennessee in 2010. On January 29, 2010, their neighbor, Daniel Champagne, who had a close bond with the Campbells and considered them like second parents, tried calling them several times. Daniel, who also had a key to their house, became concerned when he couldn't get in touch with them. So when they did not answer any of his calls, he went inside. He found that the house had been ransacked. The kitchen cabinets were all open. Daniel also made a gruesome discovery. He found William and Ina in their bedrooms, each with a gunshot wound to the head. They had medical issues and slept in separate beds. Ina still had her oxygen tube inside her nose when he found her. It was determined that their lives were taken while they were sleeping. Neighbors told investigators that this is strange, as their dogs would have barked if a stranger came in and woke the Campbells up. It led investigators to believe that the person responsible knew the dogs and the couple. Their adopted son, William Roger Campbell, then became a person of interest. It was speculated that he would gain financially from the crime. No evidence that he took his parents' lives could be found, however, and the case went cold. Then, on June 21st, William Roger Campbell was arrested at his home in connection with the case and taken to Clarksville. He was taken to the Montgomery County Jail. Investigators did not initially give the reason of why he was arrested, but you have to believe that his appearance does not help his case. Detective Keenan Carlton had this to say: "These were innocent victims. These were people who were beloved by their community. They lived in their neighborhood for a number of years. Their neighbors loved them, and they're all happy to see some resolution." Keenan gave credit to detectives who worked the case a decade ago for laying the groundwork in the investigation, and said a recent review of the case allowed detectives to put the final piece of the puzzle together and arrest Campbell. His trial started in January of 2023. During the trial, it was mentioned how Campbell profited financially from the crime. Bill Campbell's estate was worth well over $130,000, and his wife Ina's estate was over $120,000. Altogether, their Solar Roger Campbell received $180,000 from his parents' estate. It was also made public that he was seen leaving the crime scene just 40 minutes after police believed Bill and Ina's lives were taken. The fact that the dogs didn't bark was also brought up, as well as the fact that no valuables were touched. Jewelry boxes appeared undisturbed. Lock boxes had not been tampered with. Approximately $2,800 was still there. Checks remained on the dining room table, and most shockingly, the guns were also all there. The son of Campbell, Sean, described having a close relationship with his late grandparents, but had only seen his father a handful of times growing up. "I've been on this earth 35 years, and in that 35 years, I've spent less than 24 hours around him," Sean Campbell said. After the funerals of Bill and Ina Campbell, Sean Campbell was made aware of an estate auction that took place at the Campbell's residence. According to him, he was never contacted by his father to keep any of his grandparents' items as keepsakes. Linda Campbell, ex-wife of Campbell and mother of Sean, also testified. At the time, she worked at the commissary. On January 26, 2010, 3 days before the bodies were found, Linda was paged to Register 17, where she was startled to see Campbell and his mother, Ina. Before then, she hadn't seen or spoken to him in almost 13 years. Campbell struck up a conversation with her and told her he was in town visiting and would be leaving on 28th. "I thought, why do I care when you're leaving?" Linda Campbell said she had never been paged by Ina, William, or Roger before then. It appeared as if Campbell wanted to create an alibi. Agent Frederick McClintock, a CPD drug agent and crime scene investigator in 2010, said that during their detailed search of a crime scene, he found a bottle of Palmolive dish soap with a red-brown material on the back that appeared to be blood. In a field test swab, the material tested positive for blood. Later, this blood was identified through DNA to be Roger Campbell's. Bill and Ina Campbell owned an antique Lenskirch grandfather clock, and according to Andrew Smith, owner of its time clock shop, it was rare. Smith holds a degree in horology, which is the study and measurement of time. He had serviced the Campbell's grandfather clock for many years, visiting the home to perform maintenance annually. When he first laid eyes on the clock, he said he offered Bill Campbell $5,000 for it. Coincidentally, in front of Roger Campbell. Bill turned him down, saying he knew the clock was rare and antique, and he wasn't willing to part with it. In February of 2010, less than a month after Bill and Ina's lives were taken, Smith received a call asking if he was interested in buying the Lenskirch grandfather clock. When he arrived at the Campbell residence, Smith expressed his excitement to the courtroom that he was finally going to be able to buy the clock. However, instead of his normal customers, he was met by Roger Campbell. "I said, 'Where's your mom and dad?' Smith told the court. He seemed nervous and shaky and said, "Didn't you hear? Mom and Dad were shot in their bedrooms." On January 23, 2023, after about 4 hours of deliberation, 66-year-old Roger Campbell was found guilty of taking the lives of his own parents, William and Ina Campbell, in Clarksville, Tennessee. The evidence presented during the trial showed that Roger attempted to take control of his parents' estate by insisting that he was the sole heir and pressuring a neighbor to finalize the transaction. Now, Roger awaits sentencing for his actions. Moving on to the next case. The Tandar case, the horrifying crime you're referring to, occurred in 1995 in New Delhi, India, and is known as the Tandar murder. The story is chilling and grotesque, where a man, initially seen as a loving husband, became a murderer in a way that shocked the nation. His wife, Leela, had reportedly been the victim of continuous abuse and manipulation before this gruesome act. The man, who was a cook by profession, used the Tandar oven, a traditional clay oven used in cooking, during the crime. After killing his wife, he placed her body in the oven, grilling her at high temperatures. To make the act even more horrifying, he used butter to cook her body, making it unrecognizable. The case shocked the public not only because of the cruelty involved, but also due to the betrayal of trust in a marriage. This case remains one of the most infamous in India's criminal history, largely due to the horrifying method of murder and the cold-bloodedness of the act. This is India's most infamous true crime story, which unfolded between the prominent areas of Connaught Place and Karabag, situated in New Delhi. The region around Ashoka Road and Janpath Road near Karabag in New Delhi is a bustling neighborhood, characterized by its blend of residential serenity and commercial vigor. Known for its diverse community and lively atmosphere, this place offers diverse cultures, traditions, and modern conveniences. Ashoka Road leads directly to the majestic India Gate, while the Janpath area is known for hosting local cuisines and bustling markets. The area boasts a mix of residential complexes, local markets, and small businesses that cater to the daily needs of its residents. It mostly thrives with the presence of various eateries serving delectable local cuisine, adding a flavorful essence to the neighborhood. And one such famous place was Bajia Barbecue Restaurant in Hotel Ashoka Yatri Niwas, which later became the Hotel Indraprastha. However, this renowned restaurant was soon to become the center stage for a chilling incident that would later be recognized: the Tandar case. Around 11:25 p.m. on July 2, 1995, Ashoka Road in Janpath, New Delhi was getting quieter. Two policemen, Constable Abdul Nazir Kunju and Home Guard Chandler Powell, were patrolling the area. As they got closer to the Asha Jayatri Niwas Hotel, Kunju noticed flames coming from some nearby buildings. Concerned about a potential fire outbreak, the duo swiftly embarked on an investigation. Kunju made his way towards the main entry gate of Yatri Niwas, making a beeline for the front of the Bajia Barbecue Restaurant situated on the left, just inside the hotel's main entryway. From this vantage point, he observed flames emanating from the rear kitchen area of Bajia. As he approached, a uniformed security guard intercepted him, already briefed about the situation. The guard explained that the fire originated from ignited waste paper and cardboard near the outdoor tunder, reassuring Kunju that everything was under control and there was no cause for alarm. Satisfied with the explanation, policeman Kunju and Chanpal proceeded to walk away towards Jump-Off Lane. As they began to move, Anaru Devi, a middle-aged vegetable vendor often seen showcasing her produce beside the Mother Dairy Milk booth at the lane's entrance from Ashoka Road, hurriedly approached them. With her voice trembling in fear, Anaru exclaimed about the hotel being on fire. Her panicked outcry had attracted the attention of several men nearby who also began to raise the alarm. Kunju realized how serious the situation had become upon seeing the size of the fire. The flames were already clearly visible from the lane, showing that it was more than just a small fire with thick smoke soaring high, reaching to about 30 to 35 feet above Bajia's outer wall on Janpath Lane. Kunju and Chanda hurried back to the closed restaurant's entrance. By that time, Kunju started quietly cursing as he expressed his frustration, mentioning that those involved were attempting to burn the entire hotel down. Kunju then moved beyond the hotel entrance and approached the canvas screen situated in front of the Badio barbecue. Upon lifting the screen and gazing into the dimly lit restaurant, he encountered a slender man, approximately in his late 20s or early 30s, standing about 5 feet 10 inches tall and attired in a white kurta, a traditional Indian garment. This man casually informed Kunju that they were just burning some old posters and reassured him that the fire was under control. He mentioned that they had taken adequate precautionary measures, and there was no reason to worry. Despite the man's reassurance, Constable Kunju remained unconvinced. He left Chandrapal near the hotel and quickly made his way to a nearby phone booth, only to find it closed. He then jogged towards the police picket situated at the rear of the Western Court complex, located a couple of 100 meters away. Once there, he urgently relayed a wireless report of the fire to the Conic Place police station and made calls to the police control room and the fire brigade requesting immediate assistance. Upon his return to the hotel, Kunju was dismayed to witness that the blaze had escalated during his absence, with thick smoke rising high above the hotel complex. With Chandra accompanying him, they marched towards the entrance of the restaurant and assertively demanded entry to inspect the fire. Once more, the men at the restaurant refused to allow him entry. Determined, Kanju wouldn't be discouraged this time. Pretending to retreat from the Bagya, he and Chandrapal exchanged secretive words as they walked away together from the front of the hotel. Rushing down Janpath Lane, they swiftly scaled the 7-foot-high wall at the restaurant's rear without hesitation. Clearing the bamboo screen fencing, Kunji managed to enter the covered rear area of the garden restaurant. Without delay, they headed straight for the fire. The fire presented an alarming and disproportionate scene within the kitchen. Fueled by a heap of wooden logs, planks, and assorted materials piled atop the tandoor, it blazed with ferocity. One slender man, the same individual who had earlier dismissed Kunji at the front of the Bajia, was actively fueling the flames using wooden beams and bamboo poles. Another man dressed in a blue-printed shirt and a muscular young man stood nearby. At a distance, adjacent to the canvas screen by the hotel's entrance, stood a robustly built man wearing white. Curiously, these individuals appeared entirely indifferent to the foul smell emanating from the inferno. Kunju warned the man stoking the flames, cautioning him about the potential risk of causing a fire that can engulf the entire hotel. Upon being informed by the individual tending to the fire about his affiliation as a Congress Party worker engaged in burning old materials, including posters and waste paper, Kunju remained composed. Instead of being deterred by the political association, he immediately looked around for a bucket. This marked a moment where the young constable truly showcased his determination. Some individuals might have hesitated upon hearing about the political connection, particularly with the influential Congress Party. They might have offered a mild caution about fire safety before ultimately withdrawing. However, Kun just affirmed. He was alarmed by the considerable blaze before him and, alongside Chandrapal, swiftly gathered any available buckets and containers. They filled these from a nearby kitchen tap and promptly began extinguishing the flames. Soon, Sub-Inspector Rajesh Kumar arrived at the scene just as Kunju and Chandrapal were diligently working to suppress the fire. Interestingly, unlike the attempt to dismiss a constable earlier, no one dared to send a sub-inspector away. Accompanied by 2 security guards from the main hotel, Rajesh and his constables entered the restaurant and joined Kunju in combating the blaze. Working together, they successfully extinguished the fire within a matter of minutes. The intense flames had ignited certain plastic-coated overhead cables, causing further damage. Carrying along the person seemingly responsible for the mischief, Kunju, Sub-Inspector Rajesh Kumar, and the hotel guards proceeded to investigate the extent of the cable damage. Their objective was to determine whether the fire had spread to the building's first floor. They advanced towards the main lobby of Yatri Niwas, which led to the Coconut Grove restaurant. Ascending 2 flights of stairs, they reached the lower split-level first-floor terrace overlooking the Bajia complex. Constable Kunji leaned over the edge of the mezzanine roof in search of the wires that had caught fire. Instead, he was met with a rush of hot air and foul-smelling folk billowing upwards. To his surprise, he noticed that the fire above the tundra, which they had previously extinguished, had reignited. The man he had observed earlier in the Bajia, the sturdy individual clad in white, was once again fueling the flames. Kunju's initial alarm transformed into exasperation at the careless disregard for safety displayed by these people. Hurrying to the rear edge of the roof without considering the steep drop below, he leapt down, landing forcefully on the paved rear courtyard of the restaurant. Swiftly advancing towards the fire, he pushed aside the wicket fence obstructing his way and approached the tundra from the rear. Upon reaching the kitchen area, Kunji discovered that the man in the kurta pajama and his 2 companions had vanished, yet the fire continued to rage. It was at this moment that Kunji noticed a peculiar scent. Amidst the pungent and unpleasant odor, a distinct smell of roasted meat filled the air. However, this scent was not of ordinary food cooked. Rather, it carried the unmistakable and haunting odor of burning flesh. When he examined the oven, instead of finding chicken meat being prepared, they came across something profoundly disturbing. The oven contained a human body, dismembered and partially burnt. This unsettling discovery reverberated throughout the city, leaving its residents deeply disturbed and shocked. Now 2 key questions surfaced. Who might the body have belonged to, and who could have been responsible for this gruesome deed? And so began the quest for information regarding the disturbing Ben Orkhan. The dismembered and burned body parts underwent testing, and upon receiving the results, the victim's identity was unveiled. She was 29-year-old Nina Sahini. Nina, a Congress worker in New Delhi, was married to 34-year-old Sushil Sharma, who was also a youth Congress leader. The initial postmortem conducted at Lady Hardinge Medical College in Delhi concluded that the cause of death was burn injuries. Subsequently, a second postmortem was ordered by the Lieutenant Governor of Delhi. This examination was carried out by a team of 3 doctors from different hospitals led by T.D. Dogra. During this examination, 2 bullets were discovered in the head and neck region, leading the conclusion that the cause of death was due to firearm injuries. Now, as per protocol, the police intended to meet with Sushil Sharma, but he was nowhere to be located. However, the same fate did not befall the man who was involved in burning the remains at the hotel. The individual responsible for burning the remains was apprehended and identified as Kishiv Kumar, the restaurant manager of the Bajia Hotel. It didn't take long for him to disclose the identity of the other person involved, who indeed turned out to be Nina's husband, Sushil Kumar. The case seemed close to resolution almost immediately upon the initial disclosures. Yet the grim and sinister nature of this case cast a long shadow over the city, leaving a haunting impact for a prolonged period. A few days later, on July 10, 1995, Sushil Sharma surrendered. Now all that remained was to uncover the events that transpired on the day Nina was killed and ensure that justice was served. During the interrogation, it was disclosed that Sushil and his wife, Nina, had a friend named Matlab Karim. Matlab and Nina had been classmates and were colleagues in the Congress Party, sharing a close bond. However, Sushil disapproved of Nina's friendship with Milab. Arguments frequently arose between the couple over this issue, but his possessiveness took a much darker turn on the night of July 2, 1995. On that tragic night, upon returning home, Sushil encountered Nina conversing on the phone while consuming alcohol. As Nina noticed Sushil's presence, she ended the call abruptly. In a fit of anger, Sushil redialed the phone and discovered Matlab on the other end of the line. Enraged beyond control and despite Nina's attempts to explain, Sushil fatally shot her. Subsequently, he wrapped the body in a plastic bag, placed it in the trunk of his Maruti 8100 car, and proceeded to transport it to the Bajia barbecue restaurant and conspired with the restaurant manager, Keshav Kumar, to dispose of it. Nina's body was dismembered and then incinerated in a tandoor oven. With this information gathered, along with a few DNA tests to confirm the killer's identity, Sushil Sharma was soon to face the legal proceedings in court. The Delhi police conducted an investigation into the case and submitted a charge sheet on July 27, 1995 in a sessions court. Subsequently, on November 7, 2003, Sushil Sharma was sentenced to death, while the restaurant manager, Keshav Kumar, received 7 years of rigorous imprisonment. Sushil appealed against the district court's verdict in the Delhi High Court, yet the High Court upheld the decisions made by the lower courts. His death sentence was subsequently confirmed by the Delhi High Court in 2007. However, in 2013, the Supreme Court commuted his death sentence, citing the absence of evidence that Sushil had dismembered his wife's body. On October 8, 2013, a three-judge bench consisting of Chief Justice Satya Sivam and Justices Ranjana Desai and Ranjan Gogoi upheld Sharma's conviction. The court reduced his death sentence to life imprisonment due to Sushil's lack of a prior criminal record and the nature of the crime. Although both the trial court and the High Court had ordered Sushil Sharma's execution, the Supreme Court modified the sentence stating, "It is not a crime against society, but a crime committed due to his strained relationship with his wife." On December 21, 2018, the Delhi High Court issued an order for the immediate release of Sushil Sharma. The court questioned whether a person could be detained indefinitely for a murder offense even after completing a designated sentence. However, by that time, Sushil had already been released after serving 23 years in jail. According to Sushil, if he hadn't committed the crime, he believed he could have potentially become a union minister. After his release from jail, Sushil appeared to have changed as a person, yet one cannot really know the truth that lurks beneath the superficial demeanor. The hero who made justice possible, policeman Kunju's life had taken a turn. Kunju, speaking to Times of India, mentioned that he had received only 5 rupees as his reward for his brave actions. Despite making headlines in various media outlets, he now sees the incident as a brief moment of attention. Kunju claimed that the Delhi police did not acknowledge or value his policing abilities, quick response, and vigilance. He opted for voluntary retirement in 2012 and relocated to Kerala to care for his unwell mother. The 51-year-old retired officer shared that while he received an out-of-turn promotion, he was deprived of all the accompanying benefits associated with it. He mentioned being denied a salary increase under the 6-pay commission, highlighting that even lower-ranked constables who joined after him were earning more. Despite holding the position of head constable, Kunju stated that his requests were consistently rejected. On the night of the discovery, Kunji discovered a blood-stained plastic bag nearby containing the remaining parts of Nina's body and was threatened by Sushil and Keshav Kumar. The story you're referencing seems to revolve around a complex case where emotions, power dynamics, and societal pressures played significant roles. In the case of Sushil and Nina, it's clear that insecurity may have been one of the motivating factors for the crime. However, there could have been other underlying reasons, such as jealousy, a sense of betrayal, or even external pressures that push Sushil to commit such a violent act. People who feel threatened by someone, whether it's a partner, a colleague, or an acquaintance, can sometimes act out of irrational fear or possessiveness, leading to tragic consequences. As for the punishment, whether Sushil's sentence was fitting or should have been a death sentence is a matter of perspective. The justice system often aims to balance retribution with rehabilitation. Though in cases involving violent crimes, the victim's family and society may feel that a harsher punishment is warranted. Death sentences, however, are controversial and often debated as they raise ethical concerns about fairness, the potential for wrongful convictions, and the impact on society. Ultimately, the severity of the punishment should reflect not only the crime but also the values of the legal system and society at large. What do you think about the balance between justice and rehabilitation in such cases? Should personal insecurities ever be considered a valid reason for such extreme actions?